Hello, hello. So I have some exciting news. Tomorrow is going to be my last day at my current workplace, and the day after that will be my first day at the new facility that I'm transferring to. So what I want to do is make a sort of thank you gift. Like, I'm going to bring some cupcakes, I think. And besides cupcakes, I was like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna make a pop-up card. Pop-up cards were something that I have been thinking that I wanted to do for a couple weeks. I got the idea that I wanted to try to look into that and really examine that while I was doing the sweater in my last video. I was looking at a lot of holiday themed stuff, and I was like, oh, you know what? Pop-up cards would be so cool to try to figure out how they work. So when I found out just a few days back that I was being transferred this way, I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. So I admittedly don't really know much about pop-up cards. I haven't done them much except for back when I was a kid. So when we were kids, everyone knew the concept of, like, you take a piece of paper, right? You fold it in half, like the way you do a normal card, and then you can make it a pop-up card by cutting it and flipping that inverse, right? You cut it, and this part, you turn the flip, the fold inside out, and then you have a card with a whole lot of it, and you open it up and you've got a little box. And then you can take whatever you want, like out of another piece of paper, cut out a shape or something, and glue it to the fold. And that way you have a little pop-up card. This is something that we used to do a lot back when we were kids in grade school, in my school at least. So I was thinking about this, and I was like, okay, how can we push this further? Because I know people make gorgeous pop-up cards, and I'm always like, how do they do that? It looks beautiful. So I'm like, clearly the most basic idea in order to make an ordinary pop-up card look more impressive is maybe instead of gluing another piece onto here, you make that piece out of this, like carve it out. So if I'm making a thank you card and I want to say thank you, I could, let me get out a pencil. So let's say I want to cut out the words thank you here. It's not the neatest, but there's the words thank you. So if I cut that out, you know, something like this. I didn't really bother going very in depth with that, but here you have a sort of cool looking idea. So say I wanted to make a card that has the letters cut out like this. Now, rather than doing it this way that I just did, making the cut first and then cutting out something right on the front, I thought it would be neater if I were to do that just with the basic design on the cuts. So I hypothesized, well, clearly the best thing to do, I think, would be if I have the fold, I start this a certain amount down in the fold, the bottom, and then on the top, I have to leave the same amount on the top of the fold, because if it has to be the same distance in order for this to be standing up straight. So if I start the bottom an inch from the fold down here, then on the top I have to leave an inch of flat cut to be this top flower. So let's say here, I draw a line. This is where the bottom is going to be. All right. And then I say, okay, my thank you is going to start there. Right. And then here, being the top, this is not going to be where it cuts because you're going to end up thinking you need a space above that. That's going to be the fold, and then cut on the sides here. So these would be cut, this would just be a fold, this would just be a fold. Down here, this would be a fold, and the sides would be cut. So I was like, you have to make the distance between here and here the same distance as this, because that way it's gonna be what allows it to be like a 90-degree angle. I was like, seems simple enough. Let me try that out. And this is obviously a very simple version, so you can see the concept. So I cut it out, and it does make a little pop-up, like I imagined. Now, the thing I noticed is, if you do this, you leave a weird sort of negative space behind. Like, you see where I cut out the K back here? You can actually see the outline of where I cut out the K over here. And that looks weird, right? So what you can do to dress up that area is to cut even more out, like make a negative space, like a square or something. Right? Like you cut that weird area out to make it just sort of like a box. And maybe you can utilize this, like thinking about negative space and this stuff, you can utilize it to make something else. Like maybe you cut out a bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, and then the background negative space you turn into a silhouette of New York City. That'd be cool, right? Or you can leave the shape on purpose, like if you're cutting out a bunch of birds flying, and then you leave the negative space that looks like outlines of birds flying, and that makes it look like there's even more birds. So anyway, this being a thank you card for Staples, because that's my company, I thought, what if I made the background negative space kind of look like the Staples logo, which is like a rectangle that's sort of, you know, diagonal. So I started a bunch of experimentation with trying to figure out the right way to lay it out. I had some that I started with that were, you know, they were kind of flat like this, but then they had this rectangular diagonal going on, and it wasn't really working great because I had my rectangle cutting in weird. And then I thought, okay, so maybe what I have to do is make this like on a slant to follow the top of the shape and not mess with it. So I did something like this. And what I found was I had to adjust it a little bit because this, first of all, you can see there are still little things like the K and stuff, like the bottom of the K, I cut a little weirdly. I was like, okay, I have to adjust my letters so they fit more neatly in the box. And this part of the rectangle is going on to the fold. I want it to be above the fold, you know, that kind of thing. But what I realized when I make this sort of thing is that then when I try to fold it, close the card, it doesn't fold right. And I was like, what? Because I made sure that the distance between this top of this and this was still the same 1 inch that I decided to do, so that my words would still stand 90 degrees. But it doesn't really fold well. It doesn't fold right. The things are getting all messed up. So I was like, okay, maybe to make it fold straight, I need to make everything a curve. I have to cut the paper around it. So I made the bottom also on a slant. I made the top and the bottom of the paper I cut on a slant so that I could put them into my paper. This is just thank you. Right, and fold it all inside of another piece of paper or something, and it would look flat on the top, it would look flat on the bottom, but it would still give the curve. But I realized that backfired because then I just basically ended up making this a flat rectangle instead of a diagonal rectangle like I wanted. So what I ended up doing was just deciding, you know what, I'm going to stick with my original sort of design of a slant that doesn't really fold all the way down, because this is just going to be like, even though it's like a pop-up card, it's I'm just gonna stick it in front of like my stand of cupcakes or whatever anyway. So I'm okay with it not being able to close fully. So I went to AC Moore and I got some cupcake liners in red and white because those are the Staples brand colors. This actually kind of looks like Minnie Mouse, doesn't it? Maybe I'll use these sometime in the future if I ever make like Disney cupcakes. And some red cardstock and some white cardstock for the card. And also I picked myself up a cupcake carry case. But we don't want my parents to know about that one. I don't know why I don't want my parents to know about it. It's not like I use their money. I use my money that I earned from my job. But, you know, when I initially said something like, oh, maybe I'll get one of those cupcake carry cases, they were like, well, you don't need to do that. Just use Tupperware. Why would you spend money on that? You know how many times I've looked at these cupcake carry cases and been like, oh, I want that, but no, I don't need it. I don't need to spend my money on that. I can just put it in Tupperware or something. Every single time I want to bring stuff to a friend's house or something that I baked, I have like a hard time trying to figure out how to carry it. Dad was all like, just put it in Tupperware. You know what? Especially if you're doing cupcakes, they're gonna squish. They're gonna bang into each other. The frosting's gonna get all messed up. You need like, depending on how many you're making, like for this event I'm going to, well not event, workplace where there's a lot of people, not just like my 3 friends, I'm gonna need a lot of cupcakes. It would take me like 6 Tupperwares with like, what, 6 cupcakes each in them? It's ridiculous. So I got this for myself. But I'm still keeping it on the down low. Anyway, I went ahead and I sort of made a design that I printed out onto this white piece of cardstock. And you can very faintly see, because I just used a bit of Knockout very light gray to put where I want my cuts to be. I'm gonna make all that little light gray my negative space. And I made it very light because this way I can print it out on a piece of paper, cut it out, and if I miss, if I'm not exact, it doesn't matter because people won't really see it. It's just like a very faint guideline for me. And I also have the Staples logo at the bottom because this I'm gonna cut out and put into my negative space. And that part I'm just gonna cut this off entirely. So let's get cutting. Alright, so here is the white part of my thank you card. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold this red piece of cardstock in half. I'll put the white right in there. And this is gonna be like my card. So you see you have the red, like the Staples logo. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut out these Staples words that I had printed on the bottom. I'm gonna, you know, put the letters onto here, like glue them onto the red part of the paper so that when it's done, obviously this white strip won't be there. It'll have the Staples letters back there and it'll say thank you in the front. And actually, just to make this look a little nicer, I think I'm gonna trim the edges of this white paper a little bit so there's a little more of a red border, and that'll be my thank you card. And here is my assembled card. You can see I've got the Staples logo back there behind the thank you words. As I said, this, because of the diagonal, it doesn't really close properly all the way. If you don't really mind that, then I can put a link in the description for the template I used for this. I'll even take off the Staples logo from the bottom. And you know, this rectangle, it can still work as just like a decorative element or something. You know, you don't have to put the Staples part in there, obviously. If you want to make your own, you could, of course, make one that doesn't have a diagonal like this and it's just flat, and then it'll be able to close properly. So onto the cupcake stand. Here is how my little thank you display ended up looking. If you want to learn how to make that cute little disposable stand, please see my next video.